I stared at the computer screen. Numbers don't lie. In 12 years as a hematologist, I'd learned that much. But what I was about to witness would shatter everything I thought I knew about medicine. It was 2:30 in the afternoon when Marcus Johnson walked into my office at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago, 46 years old, father of 2 little girls. The kind of man who wore his wedding ring with pride and talked about his daughters like they hung the moon. His wife Angela sat beside him, her hand gripping his so tight her knuckles had gone white. She wore a blue dress. I remember that detail because later, when everything changed, I'd wonder if that was the color of miracles. "Dr. Kowalski," Marcus said, his voice steady but his eyes searching mine for hope. The blood work came back. I nodded. I had the results right there on my desk. Numbers that told a story no father of young children should ever hear. White blood cell count through the roof. Blast cells where they shouldn't be. Chromosomal abnormalities that textbooks call incompatible with survival. You see, when you've been doing this as long as I have, you learn to read between the lines of lab reports. Every elevated marker. Every abnormal cell. They speak a language that's brutally honest, and Marcus Johnson's blood was screaming. I cleared my throat. The tests show some concerning patterns. Angela leaned forward. Concerning how? How do you tell a woman her husband is dying? How do you explain to a man that his little girls might grow up without their father? In medical school, they don't teach you the right words for moments like this. They teach you the science, the protocols, the statistics, but they don't teach you how to look into someone's eyes and deliver a sentence that will divide their life into before and after. Your white blood cell count is significantly elevated, I began, choosing my words carefully. The bone marrow biopsy confirms what we suspected. You have acute myeloid leukemia. The silence that followed felt heavier than the Chicago winter outside my office windows. Angela's breathing became shallow. Marcus just stared at me, processing. What does that mean exactly? He asked. I pulled up his charts on the computer screen, pointing to the numbers that had kept me awake the night before. AML is aggressive. The blast cells, abnormal white blood cells, are crowding out your healthy cells. Your hemoglobin is dropping. Your platelet count is critically low. I paused, watching their faces. This was always the hardest part, the part where hope meets reality. Based on your cytogenetics, the chromosomal analysis, this is what we classify as high-risk AML. The specific mutations you have. Marcus, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. Angela's voice cracked when she spoke. How long? Those 2 words hung in the air like smoke. In all my years practicing hematology, those are the 2 words that cut the deepest. Not, what can we do? Or, what are our options? Just, how long? I looked at Marcus's labs again. FLT3 ITD mutation positive. Complex karyotype. The kind of genetic markers that made even the most optimistic oncologists pause. In medical journals, patients like Marcus were measured in months, not years. Without treatment, we're looking at weeks, I said quietly. With aggressive chemotherapy, maybe 6 to 12 months. The 5-year survival rate for your specific subtype is less than 15%. The words felt like stones falling from my mouth. 15%. In poker, those odds might excite you. In medicine, they're a whisper away from a... Angela's hand moved to cover her mouth. Marcus sat perfectly still, the way people do when they're trying to hold their whole world together. But there's treatment, Angela said, grasping for something solid to hold on to. Chemotherapy. Clinical trials. There has to be something. I nodded. We can start induction chemotherapy immediately. Cytarabine and daunorubicin. It's aggressive. And given your genetic profile, the response rate is... I hesitated. Statistics felt cruel in moments like this. It's challenging. Marcus finally spoke. My daughters. Zoe is 9. Maya just turned 6 last month. His voice broke slightly. They don't know anything yet. The weight of that statement settled over all of us. 2 little girls going about their days, maybe arguing over toys or complaining about homework, with no idea their father was fighting a war inside his own blood. I've delivered difficult diagnoses hundreds of times. Each one takes something from you. But there was something about Marcus Johnson that hit differently. Maybe it was the way he wore that wedding ring, or how he kept a photo of his girls on his keychain. Maybe it was how young he looked, or how Angela's love for him filled every corner of that room. "We'll start treatment immediately," I said. "I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be the fight of your life. But we're going to fight it together." Marcus nodded, squaring his shoulders the way men do when they're preparing for battle. Angela wiped her eyes, already shifting into the role of warrior wife. As they prepared to leave, scheduling the first round of chemotherapy, Angela turned back to me. There was something in her eyes I'd seen before in families facing impossible odds, something that went beyond hope, something that looked like absolute certainty. "Dr. Kowalski," she said, her voice steady now. "We're going to pray about this. We're going to ask God for a miracle." I nodded politely, the way doctors do when families mention faith. I'd heard those words before. I'd watched families pray over terminal diagnoses. I'd seen the power of belief to comfort people in their darkest hours. But I'd also seen the numbers, the science, the relentless mathematics of cellular biology. What I didn't know was that sometimes the impossible has a way of rewriting the rules. That night, I sat in my home office in Lincoln Park, staring at Marcus Johnson's file. The numbers glowed on my laptop screen like accusations. White blood cell count, 127,000. Normal range, 4,000 to 11,000. Blast cells, 87%. Anything over 20% confirms leukemia. 87% was a tsunami of malignant cells drowning his healthy blood. My wife Elena found me there at 11:30. "Still working?" I closed the laptop. "Difficult case." She knew not to ask for details. 12 years of marriage to a hematologist had taught her that some stories stayed in the hospital. But she could read my face. "Young patient?" she asked softly. I nodded. 2 daughters, 6 and 9. Elena squeezed my shoulder. In moments like this, words felt useless. She went to bed, leaving me alone with the weight of Marcus Johnson's impossible odds. The next morning arrived gray and cold, typical Chicago February. I arrived at the hospital early, reviewing treatment protocols. Induction chemotherapy for high-risk AML, 7 days of cytarabine, 3 days of daunorubicin. The numbers were clinical, precise, but behind every protocol was a human story, a family holding their breath. Dr. Lisa O'Connor knocked on my office door at 7:15. "Tom, I reviewed the Johnson case. Those genetic markers?" "I know," I said. "The FLT3-ITD mutation with that karyotype. I've never seen a response to standard induction." Lisa had been practicing oncology for 8 years. She was brilliant, methodical, and brutally honest about prognoses. If Lisa was concerned, the situation was worse than difficult. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "Clinical trial. There's an experimental FLT3 inhibitor at University of Chicago, combined with hypomethylating agents. It's aggressive, but it's his only shot." She nodded. "I can make the call." At 9 o'clock sharp, Marcus and Angela arrived for his first treatment. Marcus looked different somehow. Not physically. He still had that pallor, that subtle weight loss that comes with advanced leukemia. But there was something in his posture, a calmness I hadn't expected. Angela carried a small leather journal. I noticed it because she clutched it the way people hold precious things. "How are you feeling, Marcus?" I asked. "Ready," he said simply. We walked to the infusion center. Room 314. I'd delivered hundreds of patients to that room over the years. Some emerged in remission. Others, the mathematics of cellular biology usually won. As the nurse prepared the IV, I explained the process. The cytarabine will run for 7 days straight. 24 hours a day. It's designed to kill rapidly dividing cells. Unfortunately, that includes some healthy cells too. You'll feel weak, nauseous. Your immune system will crash. Marcus listened intently. Angela took notes in her leather journal. "The goal," I continued, "is to wipe out as many blast cells as possible. Create space for healthy cells to recover. We call it induction because we're inducing remission." "And if it doesn't work?" Angela asked. The question hung between us. In medicine, we dance around failure with phrases like suboptimal response and refractory disease. But Angela wanted honesty. If it doesn't work, we have other options. Clinical trials. Experimental treatments. I paused. But Marcus, I need you to understand. Your specific genetic profile makes this challenging. He nodded. Doctor, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you believe in miracles? The question caught me off guard. In 12 years of practicing hematology, patients had asked me about survival rates, side effects, second opinions. But miracles? That was new territory. I believe in medicine, I said carefully. I believe in science, in data, in giving patients the best possible care based on evidence. Marcus smiled slightly. That's not what I asked. Angela opened her journal. Inside, I glimpsed pages of handwritten text. Prayers, maybe. Or notes from their pastor. I couldn't read the words, but I could see the care with which they'd been written. Dr. Kowalski, Angela said. Last night our pastor came to visit. Pastor Williams from New Hope Baptist on the south side. He's been our spiritual father for 15 years. She turned a page in her journal. He told us something I can't stop thinking about. He said sometimes God allows the impossible to happen in the presence of doctors who need to witness his power. I felt uncomfortable. Not because I opposed their faith. I respected it deeply. But because in my world, hope had to be tempered with reality. False hope could be more cruel than honest despair. I understand, I said. And I want you to know that your faith is important. It can be a tremendous source of strength during treatment. It's more than strength, Marcus said. It's certainty. The word hung in the air. Certainty. In medicine, certainty was dangerous. It made doctors arrogant, patients reckless. I'd learned to live in the gray areas between hope and reality. The nurse finished connecting the IV. Clear fluid began flowing into Marcus's bloodstream. Cytarabine. A molecule designed to interfere with DNA synthesis, to kill cells that divided too rapidly. It was elegant in its simplicity, ruthless in its mechanism. The treatment starts now, I said. We'll monitor your blood counts daily. Watch for side effects. Adjust medications as needed. Angela held Marcus's hand as the chemotherapy began its work. Outside the window, Chicago stretched gray and endless under February clouds. Inside room 314, a family was betting everything on 15% odds. Doctor, Marcus said as I prepared to leave, we're going to pray for you too. That God opens your eyes to see what he's about to do. I left the room feeling unsettled. Not by their faith. I'd grown up Catholic, understood the comfort of belief, but by their absolute certainty. By the way they spoke about miracles as if they'd already happened. As I walked back to my office, I wondered if I was about to witness medical history, or if I was simply watching a family prepare to face the unthinkable with grace. The first 3 days of Marcus's treatment followed the script I'd written in my mind 100 times before. His white blood cell count began dropping, not dramatically, but enough to show the chemotherapy was working. Day 1, 127,000. Day 2, 98,000. Day 3, 71,000. Progress, but still catastrophically high. I checked on him every morning at 6:45 before my official rounds. Room 314 had become a sanctuary of sorts. Not quiet. Hospitals are never quiet. But peaceful in a way that defied the chaos of cellular warfare happening inside Marcus's bloodstream. Angela never left his side. She'd converted the visitor's chair into a makeshift command center. Her leather journal lay open, filled with notes about medication times, side effect observations, and what looked like daily prayers. She'd also brought a small cooler with homemade soup that Marcus couldn't keep down, but the smell filled the room with something that felt like home. How are you feeling today? I asked on day 4. Marcus looked pale, exhausted. The chemotherapy was doing exactly what it was designed to do, killing rapidly dividing cells. Unfortunately, that included the cells lining his stomach, his mouth, his intestines. He'd lost 12 pounds. His hair was starting to thin. Grateful, he said simply. It wasn't the answer I expected. Patients usually reported nausea, fatigue, pain. Marcus reported gratitude. The nurses tell me you've been having visitors, I observed. Angela smiled. Our church family. Pastor Williams comes every evening. The prayer circle meets here Tuesday and Thursday nights. I'd noticed the increased foot traffic. Groups of people moving quietly through the hallway, carrying flowers, food containers, and what I could only describe as an atmosphere of expectation. Not the desperate hope of families facing terminal diagnoses, but something more confident, more certain. That's wonderful, I said. Support systems are crucial during treatment. Dr. Kowalski, Marcus said, adjusting his position carefully. Can I ask you something personal? I nodded. Do you pray? The question caught me off guard again. Patients asked about side effects, survival statistics, treatment timelines. They didn't usually inquire about my spiritual life. Well, I was raised Catholic. My family went to St. Alphonsus growing up. But do you pray now? I thought about it. Elena and I attended Christmas Mass, Easter service. We'd been married in Holy Name Cathedral. But actual prayer? Conversations with God? That felt like something I'd left behind with childhood, along with belief in magic and certainty that good always triumphed. Not regularly, I admitted. Marcus smiled. Would you pray with us now? The request hung in the air. I looked around the room, at the IV bags dripping poison into Marcus's veins, at the monitors displaying his vital signs, at the medical equipment that represented everything I understood about healing. And then I looked at his face, peaceful despite everything, and at Angela's eyes, bright with something I couldn't name. I wouldn't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Angela said gently. Just be present. They joined hands, and after a moment's hesitation, I took Angela's other hand. We formed a small circle around Marcus's hospital bed, and in that sterile room filled with the smell of disinfectant and the hum of machines, something shifted. Pastor Williams had told them that prayer wasn't about changing God's mind, Angela explained later. It was about aligning human hearts with divine will, about creating space for the impossible. I didn't understand it then, but I felt something in that moment. Not religious conversion or sudden faith, but presence. Like the room had expanded somehow to hold more than just 3 people hoping for the best. Marcus's blood work on day 5 showed more improvement. White countdown to 45,000. Still dangerous, still far from normal, but moving in the right direction. Dr. O'Connor reviewed the numbers with cautious optimism. It's responding, she said. Not dramatically, but responding. What does that mean for his prognosis? If we can get him into remission, complete remission, maybe we buy time for a bone marrow transplant. But Tom... She paused, studying the genetic markers again. These mutations don't usually clear. Even with perfect response to induction, relapse is almost inevitable. Almost inevitable. In medicine, we lived in those small spaces between almost and always. It was where hope resided, fragile and mathematical. That afternoon, something unusual happened. I was reviewing labs in my office when my assistant knocked. Dr. Kowalski? There's someone here to see you about Marcus Johnson. A woman entered, elderly, dignified, carrying herself with the kind of quiet authority that comes from decades of experience. She wore a simple black dress and a small gold cross. Dr. Kowalski, I'm Evelyn Johnson, Marcus's mother. I stood, extending my hand. Mrs. Johnson, how is Marcus doing today? She smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. That's what I came to talk to you about. Doctor, I need you to understand something about my son. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap. Marcus was born 3 months early. The doctors told us he wouldn't survive. Too small, they said. Lungs too underdeveloped. We should prepare ourselves. I listened, wondering where this was heading. I held him for what I thought would be the last time. This tiny little thing, barely 2 pounds, fighting for every breath. Day 7 arrived with the kind of February cold that makes Chicago feel like the edge of the world. I woke at 4:30 in the morning, unable to sleep, and arrived at the hospital before sunrise. The lab results wouldn't be ready until 6, but I needed to be there. Something was pulling me toward room 314 like gravity. The hallway was quieter than usual, that pre-dawn hospital silence where even the machines seemed to whisper. But as I approached Marcus's room, I heard something unexpected. Singing. Low, harmonious voices carrying a melody I didn't recognize but somehow felt in my chest. I paused outside the door. Through the small window I could see them. Marcus, still pale but sitting up straighter than he had in days. Angela, her journal closed for once, hands raised slightly. And surrounding them, maybe 15 people from their church, forming a circle around the hospital bed. Pastor Williams stood at the foot of the bed, his deep voice leading what sounded like an old hymn. Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. I'd heard the song before, probably at Christmas services with Elena's family. But hearing it in a hospital room at 5:45 in the morning, sung by people who had no medical reason to hope, hit me differently. It sounded less like wishful thinking and more like certainty. I knocked gently. Pastor Williams looked up and smiled, gesturing for me to enter. Dr. Kowalski, we were just finishing. I don't want to interrupt. You're not interrupting, Marcus said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. You're right on time. The group began to disperse, each person stopping to embrace Marcus and Angela, to whisper something in their ears that made them nod with peaceful smiles. Whatever they were saying, it wasn't "get well soon" or "we're hoping for the best." It sounded more like "see you soon" or "we'll be celebrating." Pastor Williams was the last to leave. He shook my hand with both of his. Doctor, thank you for taking such good care of our brother. I'm just doing my job. No, he said, looking directly into my eyes. You're being used for something bigger than your job, whether you realize it or not. After they left, the room felt different. Not empty, charged somehow. Like the air before a thunderstorm, pregnant with possibility. How are you feeling, Marcus? Different, he said immediately. I woke up this morning feeling different. Angela opened her journal and showed me the page she'd been writing on. I've been tracking everything. His appetite came back yesterday evening. He kept down the whole bowl of soup. His energy is better. And look. She pointed to Marcus's arms. For the past week, he'd been covered in petechiae, tiny purple spots that appeared when platelet counts dropped dangerously low. This morning, I could see fewer of them. His color looked better too, less of that grayish pallor that came with severe anemia. The lab results should be ready in a few minutes, I said, trying to maintain clinical objectivity. We'll know more then. But even as I said it, I was noticing things that didn't require lab confirmation. His breathing was easier. His eyes were clearer. The subtle tremor in his hands that had developed from low magnesium levels was gone. At 6:15, my phone buzzed. Lab results available. I excused myself and walked to the nearest computer terminal, my heart pounding in a way that felt completely unprofessional. I'd reviewed thousands of lab results. This was just data. Numbers on a screen. I logged in and pulled up Marcus Johnson's complete blood count. I stared at the numbers. Then I refreshed the page, thinking there might be an error. The numbers didn't change. White blood cell count, 12,500. Normal range, 4,000 to 11,000. I read it again. Yesterday it had been 28,000. Normal was 11,000 or below. Marcus Johnson's white count wasn't just better. It was normal. My hands were shaking as I scrolled down. Hemoglobin, 11.2. Platelets, 195,000. Every number that had been screaming catastrophe a week ago was now whispering normalcy. But that wasn't the impossible part. The impossible part was the differential count. The breakdown of cell types, blast percentage, 3%. I sat back in my chair, feeling like the world had tilted on its axis. 3% blast cells. Normal was less than 5%. A week ago, Marcus had 87% blast cells, a tsunami of cancerous cells drowning his healthy blood. Now, he had 3%. I picked up the phone and called the lab directly. This is Dr. Kowalski. I need you to run the Johnson sample again. Complete blood count with differential. I think there might be a mix-up. Dr. Kowalski, we ran it twice already. Thought you might call. The results are confirmed. You ran it twice? Yes, sir. We were as surprised as you probably are. Never seen numbers change like that. I hung up and stared at the screen again. In 12 years of practicing hematology, I'd never seen anything like this. Acute myeloid leukemia didn't just disappear, especially not high-risk AML with unfavorable genetics. The medical literature was clear. Patients with Marcus's specific mutations had dismal outcomes, even with aggressive treatment. Yet here were the numbers, stark and undeniable on my computer screen. I walked back to room 314 in a daze. Marcus and Angela were talking quietly, her hand in his. They looked up when I entered, and I saw something in their faces that I'd missed before. They weren't surprised. They were expectant, like people waiting for news they already knew was coming. "The lab results are back," I said, still processing what I'd seen. "Good news?" Angela asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. I sat down heavily in the visitor's chair. "Marcus, your blood work is normal." Angela closed her eyes and whispered something that might have been, "Thank you." Marcus nodded slowly, as if I'd just confirmed something he'd felt in his bones. "What does that mean exactly?" he asked, though again his tone suggested he understood perfectly. "It means the leukemia is in complete remission. Your white blood cell count is normal. The blast percentage is normal. Your hemoglobin and platelets are normal." I paused, struggling with the words. "Medically speaking, you show no evidence of cancer." The silence that followed wasn't the stunned quiet of people receiving unexpected news. It was the peaceful silence of people receiving expected news. Like they'd been waiting for me to catch up to something they'd already known. "Doctor," Marcus said gently, "are you okay?" The question startled me. Shouldn't I be asking him that? "I don't understand what happened," I admitted. "These results, they don't match anything I've seen in my career. Patients with your genetic markers don't respond like this to standard chemotherapy." Angela opened her journal and showed me a page near the back. "Dr. Kowalski, this is what we've been praying for. Not hope, not possibility. This exact result." She pointed to words written in careful handwriting. "Complete healing. Normal blood counts. Total remission." God's glory revealed through Dr. Kowalski's eyes. "When did you write that?" I asked. "The night you diagnosed him. Before we started treatment. Pastor Williams told us to pray specifically, to ask for exactly what we wanted God to do. So we did." I looked at the journal entry, then at the lab results still glowing on my phone screen, then at Marcus sitting in his hospital bed, looking healthier than he had any medical right to look. "I need to run more tests," I said, grasping for solid ground. "Genetic analysis, flow cytometry. We need to confirm these results." "Of course," Marcus said kindly. "Do whatever you need to do. But, doctor," he smiled, "God isn't finished yet." The next 72 hours became the most scientifically rigorous 3 days of my career. I ordered every test available in modern hematology. Flow cytometry to analyze cell populations, cytogenetics to examine chromosomes, molecular studies to detect genetic mutations, bone marrow biopsy to see what was happening at the source. I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. Because if I was right, if Marcus Johnson had somehow achieved complete molecular remission from high-risk AML in 7 days, then everything I understood about medicine was inadequate. Dr. O'Connor found me in my office Thursday morning, surrounded by lab reports and medical journals. "Tom, you look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I admitted. "Lisa, look at these results." She pulled up a chair and studied the reports spread across my desk. Flow cytometry, no abnormal blast cells detected. Cytogenetics, normal male karyotype. Molecular studies, no FLT3-ITD mutation detected. "This can't be the same patient," she said finally. I thought so too. I had them run the samples 3 times. I personally verified the specimen labels. Same patient. Lisa picked up the original diagnostic report from 10 days ago. FLT3-ITD positive. Complex karyotype. Blast count 87%. She compared it to the current results. All normal. "Tom, this is impossible. You don't clear FLT3-ITD mutations. They're genetic. They don't just disappear." That's what I thought too. She was quiet for a long moment, studying the numbers. Lisa had trained at Johns Hopkins, published research on leukemia genetics. She understood the science as well as anyone. "Have you considered specimen mix-up? Lab error?" First thing I checked. The original samples are still in storage. I had them reanalyzed yesterday. Same results as the initial diagnosis. And the new samples? Definitely from Marcus Johnson. I watched the phlebotomist draw the blood myself. Lisa set down the reports and looked at me directly. What are you thinking? I don't know what I'm thinking. That's the problem. That afternoon, I performed Marcus's bone marrow biopsy personally. It's an uncomfortable procedure, inserting a needle into the hip bone to extract marrow for analysis. But Marcus tolerated it with the same peaceful demeanor he'd shown throughout his treatment. "Doctor," he said as I prepared the specimen for pathology, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you afraid of what you might find?" The question hit me like a diagnosis. Was I afraid? I was a scientist. I sought truth through evidence. But the truth these results suggested challenged the foundation of everything I'd built my career on. "Maybe," I admitted. "Don't be," he said simply. Truth is truth, whether we understand it or not. The bone marrow results came back Friday afternoon. I stared at the pathologist's report, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. Normal cellular bone marrow with normal maturation of all cell lines. No evidence of acute leukemia. No blast cells identified. Chromosomal analysis normal. I picked up the phone and called Dr. Sarah Chen, the pathologist who'd analyzed both specimens. "Sarah, this is Tom Kowalski. About the Johnson bone marrow samples." "Tom, I knew you'd call. I've been doing this for 15 years. Never seen anything like it. The original biopsy showed packed blast cells, 87%. Now you're seeing 0%? "Correct. I reviewed both slides side by side. It's like looking at samples from 2 completely different people. But they're not from 2 different people. No, they're not." After I hung up, I sat alone in my office as the Chicago skyline darkened outside my windows. Every scientific principle I'd learned said this was impossible. Genetic mutations didn't reverse themselves. Chromosomal abnormalities didn't spontaneously correct. Cancer cells didn't just disappear without explanation. Yet the evidence was undeniable. I walked to room 314 one more time. Marcus was scheduled for discharge the next morning, something that would have been unthinkable a week ago. Angela was packing their belongings, humming the same hymn I'd heard them singing that morning. "Dr. Kowalski," she said, looking up from folding clothes. "You look troubled." "The bone marrow results came back," I said. Marcus sat up in bed. "And?" "Normal. Completely normal. No cancer cells. No genetic abnormalities. Nothing." Instead of celebration, they both nodded calmly, as if I just told them the weather forecast. "Marcus," I said, sitting down heavily, "I need you to understand what this means medically. What happened to you doesn't happen. Genetic mutations don't disappear. Chromosomes don't repair themselves. This defies medical explanation." "Doctor," Marcus said gently, "just because medicine can't explain it doesn't mean it can't be explained. Then how do you explain it?" Angela closed her suitcase and sat down beside her husband. "The same way we explained his premature birth 46 years ago. The same way we explained our marriage when everyone said we were too young. The same way we explained Zoe's recovery from meningitis when she was 3, and Maya's healing from that heart murmur when she was born." She opened her leather journal one last time and showed me pages I hadn't seen before. Lists of dates, names, medical conditions. A family history written not in medical terminology, but in the language of answered prayers. "This is who Marcus is," she said simply. "This is who our family is. We don't live in the land of medical explanations. We live in the territory of miracles." I looked at the journal, then at Marcus, then at the discharge papers I'd be signing in the morning. Medically, I was releasing a patient with no evidence of cancer. Personally, I was witnessing something that challenged every assumption I'd made about the nature of reality. What do I tell other doctors? What do I put in my case notes? "The truth," Marcus said, "that sometimes the impossible happens. That medicine doesn't have all the answers. That there's territory beyond what science can measure." Pastor Williams arrived that evening for what he called a Thanksgiving visit. He found me still in Marcus's room, struggling to process what I'd witnessed. "Doctor," he said, "can I share something with you?" I nodded. 30 years ago, I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4, given 6 weeks to live. My congregation prayed the same way they prayed for Marcus, specifically, believing for complete healing. He pulled out his wallet and showed me a photo, himself with his wife and 4 grown children. That was 30 years ago. I've never had a recurrence. Never had another symptom. Every scan shows normal pancreas. He smiled. My oncologist still uses my case in medical conferences, calls me the statistical anomaly. He put his hand on my shoulder. "Doctor, you've been chosen to witness something most physicians never see. The question isn't whether you can explain it. The question is whether you'll let it change you." As I drove home that night, I thought about truth and evidence, about the limitations of human understanding, about the vast territory that exists beyond medical textbooks. Marcus Johnson was going home tomorrow, healed of a disease that should have taken his life. The science was undeniable, even if the mechanism remained inexplicable. And somewhere in the space between what I knew and what I'd witnessed, something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of what was possible. Saturday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine, the kind of February day in Chicago that feels like a promise of spring. I arrived at the hospital early, carrying Marcus Johnson's discharge papers and a weight of questions I couldn't answer. Room 314 buzzed with quiet activity. Angela had packed everything except the leather journal, which lay open on the bedside table. Marcus sat in the chair by the window, fully dressed, looking like any other man preparing to go home, except that 3 weeks ago, this man had been dying. "Ready to go home?" I asked, though the question felt surreal. "More than ready," Marcus said, standing and extending his hand. "Dr. Kowalski, thank you. For everything." I shook his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip, the warmth of circulation that had been compromised just days ago by critically low hemoglobin levels. Everything about him radiated health, color in his cheeks, clarity in his eyes, steadiness in his movement. "Marcus, I need to ask you something before you leave." "Of course." "What do you remember about that first day, when I gave you the diagnosis?" He considered the question carefully. "I remember fear. Real, deep fear. Not for myself. I'd made peace with whatever God had planned. But fear for Angela, for my girls. Fear of leaving them behind." "And when did that change?" "The moment Angela said we were going to pray for a miracle. It wasn't hope that changed. Hope was always there. It was certainty. Like someone had whispered the ending of the story in my ear." Dr. O'Connor appeared in the doorway. "Tom, sorry to interrupt. Could I speak with you for a moment?" We stepped into the hallway. Lisa looked troubled in a way I'd rarely seen. "Tom, I've been thinking about this case all weekend. I consulted with 3 different hematologists yesterday. Dr. Peterson at Mayo, Dr. Rodriguez at MD Anderson, Dr. Kim at Sloan Kettering." "What did they say?" "They said what I expected them to say. That spontaneous remission from high-risk AML is theoretically impossible. That genetic mutations don't reverse. That we must have made an error somewhere." I waited for her to continue. "But Tom, I reviewed everything. Lab procedures, specimen handling, pathology reports. There's no error. The science is solid." She paused. "Which means either our understanding of leukemia is fundamentally flawed or what? Or we witnessed something that doesn't fit into our current model of reality." Before I could respond, Angela appeared beside us. "Dr. O'Connor, thank you for taking such good care of us." Lisa smiled, though I could see the struggle in her eyes. "Mrs. Johnson, your husband is remarkable. This recovery is unprecedented." "God is remarkable," Angela corrected gently. "Marcus is just the canvas he chose to paint on this time." After Lisa left, I walked with Marcus and Angela to the hospital entrance. The discharge process felt routine. Signing papers, scheduling follow-up appointments, reviewing post-treatment instructions that suddenly seemed absurd given the circumstances. "Doctor," Angela said as we reached the main lobby, "there's something I want you to have." She opened her leather journal and tore out a page, the page where she'd written her specific prayers for Marcus's healing. I want you to keep this, as a reminder. I took the paper, reading the carefully written words. Complete healing. Normal blood counts. Total remission. God's glory revealed through Dr. Kowalski's eyes. Why do you want me to have this? Because this isn't the end of your story, Doctor. This is the beginning. Marcus's daughters arrived with their grandmother, Zoe and Maya, 9 and 6, running through the hospital lobby with the kind of energy that only children possess. They wrapped themselves around their father like he'd been gone for months instead of 10 days. "Daddy, you look different," Maya said, studying his face with the serious attention children give to important things. "Different how, baby girl?" "Brighter. Like someone turned up the lights inside you." From the mouths of babes. Maya had described something I'd noticed but couldn't articulate. Marcus did look brighter somehow, like his recovery had illuminated something more than just his blood chemistry. As they prepared to leave, Marcus turned back to me one final time. "Doctor, can I tell you something that might sound strange?" I nodded. "While I was sick, I had dreams. Every night. Dreams where I was standing in your office, but not the office as it is now. A different office. And you were there, but older. Grayer. And you were telling another family about miracles you'd witnessed, about God working through medicine. The image sent chills down my spine. What else did you see? You were different too, like Maya said, brighter, like someone had turned up the lights inside you." They left through the automatic doors into the February sunshine, a family reunited by something I couldn't explain but could no longer deny. I stood in the lobby for several minutes, holding Angela's prayer page, watching them drive away in their Honda Civic like any normal family on any normal Saturday. But nothing about this was normal. I spent the rest of the weekend in my home office, surrounded by medical journals and research papers, trying to find some precedent for what I'd witnessed. Spontaneous remission occurred in less than 1% of cancer cases, usually in patients with robust immune systems, fighting less aggressive malignancies. But high-risk AML with unfavorable genetics? The literature was clear. This didn't happen. Elena found me there Sunday evening, staring at Marcus's discharge summary on my laptop screen. "You're different," she said, unconsciously echoing Maya's observation. "Different how?" "Quieter, more thoughtful. Like you're processing something big." She was right. Something had shifted in me. Something I couldn't name but felt in the way I moved through the world. Like I was carrying a secret that was too large for normal conversation. Too profound for casual sharing. "Elena," I said finally, "what if everything we think we know about reality is incomplete?" She sat down beside me. "Then we learn more." "But what if more includes things that can't be measured? Things that exist outside the boundaries of science?" "Then science has to expand to include them." It was a simple answer, but it felt like permission to believe what I'd witnessed. Not blind faith, but evidence-based wonder. The numbers were undeniable. The recovery was real. The mechanism remained mysterious, but the result was measurable, documentable, verifiable. Marcus Johnson had been healed of something that medical science said couldn't be healed. And I had been chosen to witness it. 3 months later, Marcus Johnson walked into my office for his follow-up appointment. Not the slow, careful walk of a cancer patient monitoring for recurrence, but the confident stride of a man who'd been given his life back. "Dr. Kowalski," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "You look like you've been thinking." He was right. I'd been thinking about everything. About medicine, about faith, about the vast territory of human experience that exists beyond textbook explanations. The Marcus Johnson case had become my obsession, not because I was trying to solve a medical mystery, but because I was trying to understand what it meant for me as a physician. "Your lab results came back," I said, pulling up his latest blood work on the computer. "Everything's perfect. Complete blood count, comprehensive metabolic panel, tumor markers, all normal." 3 months and counting, Marcus said with a smile. 3 months and counting, I repeated, though the phrase carried weight beyond simple time measurement. In medical oncology, every clean scan, every normal lab result, every day without symptoms was a small victory against statistics that had predicted otherwise. "Doctor, can I ask you something personal?" I'd learned to expect unexpected questions from Marcus Johnson. Go ahead. How has this changed you? The question hung in the air between us. How had it changed me? I'd been asking myself the same thing for months. My approach to medicine hadn't become less scientific. If anything, I'd become more rigorous in my documentation, more thorough in my analysis. But something deeper had shifted. I think I've become more humble, I said finally. More aware of what I don't know. That's good. Humility opens doors that arrogance keeps locked. 2 weeks after Marcus's discharge, I'd presented his case to the hospital's tumor board, a monthly meeting where complex cancer cases were discussed by multidisciplinary teams. I'd expected skepticism, requests for additional testing, theories about lab errors or specimen mix-ups. Instead, I'd encountered something unexpected. Other stories. Dr. Sarah Martinez from radiology mentioned a patient whose brain tumor had completely disappeared between diagnosis and scheduled surgery. Dr. James Thompson from cardiology described a woman whose heart failure had reversed so completely that her ejection fraction had returned to normal levels. Dr. Patricia Lee from pediatric oncology quietly shared the case of a 7-year-old with neuroblastoma whose scans had gone from terminal to no evidence of disease over the course of 2 weeks. We don't usually talk about these cases, Dr. Martinez had said. They're statistical outliers, medical anomalies, but maybe we should be talking about them. That conversation had haunted me for weeks. How many inexplicable recoveries had we witnessed individually but never discussed collectively? How many miracles had we attributed to statistical variance rather than examining the possibility that something beyond our current understanding was at work? Marcus, I said now, leaning back in my chair. I've been thinking about starting a research study. Not on cancer treatment, but on cases like yours. Unexplained remissions. Complete recoveries that defy medical explanation. His eyes lit up. That sounds important. The challenge is that medicine doesn't have a framework for studying miracles. We can document the before and after, but we can't measure the mechanism. We can't quantify faith or divine intervention or whatever you want to call what happened to you. Maybe that's not the point, Marcus suggested. Maybe the point is to acknowledge that they happen. To create space for the inexplicable in a profession that demands explanations for everything. I pulled out a folder from my desk drawer. Inside were photocopies of Angela's journal pages, the specific prayers she'd written, the timeline of Marcus's recovery, the documentation of what their faith community had believed would happen. I'd been studying them like medical literature, looking for patterns, trying to understand the correlation between expectation and outcome. Your wife wrote down exactly what she was praying for, I said, showing him the pages. Complete healing. Normal blood counts. Total remission. It reads like a medical chart note written in advance. Angela has always been specific in her prayers. Pastor Williams taught us that God responds to detailed faith, not vague hope. But how did she know? How did she know to pray for exactly what happened? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Doctor, what if the question isn't how she knew, but how she trusted? What if faith isn't about predicting outcomes, but about aligning yourself with possibilities that exist beyond current understanding? The conversation stayed with me for days. I'd been approaching Marcus's recovery as a medical mystery to solve, but maybe it was something else entirely. Maybe it was an invitation to expand my understanding of what healing could look like. That weekend, Elna and I attended Mass at St. Alphonsus for the first time in years. Not because I'd experienced some dramatic religious conversion, but because I felt drawn to explore the spiritual dimensions of what I'd witnessed. During the homily, Father Rodriguez spoke about miracles in the modern world. Miracles aren't violations of natural law, he said. They're expressions of laws we haven't discovered yet. They're windows into a reality larger than our current understanding can contain. After the service, I found myself in conversation with other parishioners who'd heard about Marcus's recovery through their networks of prayer. Word travels fast in communities of faith, and apparently the story of the hematologist who'd witnessed an impossible healing had become something of a local legend. Dr. Kowalski, an elderly woman named Rose, approached me. My grandson has leukemia. He's 8 years old. Would you pray with us? The request caught me off guard. I was a physician, not a priest. But as I looked into her hopeful eyes, I realized that the line between medical treatment and spiritual intervention had blurred in ways I was still learning to navigate. "Of course," I said. We stood in a small circle in the church lobby. Rose, her daughter, her 8-year-old grandson with the pale complexion I recognized all too well. They joined hands, and I found myself praying not just for healing, but for wisdom to understand my role in whatever was about to unfold. As we prayed, I thought about Marcus's dream. The vision of me in a different office, older and grayer, telling other families about miracles I'd witnessed. Maybe this was how it began. Maybe this was what it meant to be chosen not just to witness the impossible, but to participate in it. 1 year later, I sat in my office reviewing Marcus Johnson's annual follow-up results. 12 months of perfect blood work. 12 months of normal scans. 12 months of a man living fully in a life he wasn't supposed to have. But Marcus's story had become more than just a medical anomaly in my files. It had become the foundation for something I never expected to build. A bridge between the science I'd dedicated my life to and the mystery I could no longer ignore. The research study I'd proposed had gained approval from the hospital's Institutional Review Board. Unexplained remissions in oncology, a prospective analysis. Wasn't exactly the kind of study that made headlines in medical journals, but it had attracted attention from physicians who'd been quietly collecting their own impossible cases. Dr. O'Connor had become my co-investigator. "Tom," she'd said when I first proposed the study, "if we don't document these cases, who will? If we don't ask the questions, who's going to look for the answers?" In 12 months, we documented 17 cases of recoveries that defied medical explanation. Not every patient who received prayer was healed. The mathematics of suffering remained complex and painful. But enough cases existed to establish a pattern that demanded acknowledgement, if not understanding. The 8-year-old boy I'd prayed for in church, Michael Torres, had achieved complete remission from all within 6 weeks of diagnosis. His oncologist called it an unusually robust response to treatment. His grandmother called it answered prayer. I called it both. That afternoon, Marcus arrived for his 1-year follow-up with Angela and their daughters. Zoe had grown taller, more serious, carrying herself with the wisdom that comes from almost losing a parent. Maya still radiated the irrepressible energy of childhood, but now she hugged her father a little longer, held his hand a little tighter. "Dr. Kowalski," Zoe said as I reviewed her father's results. "My dad says you've changed since he was sick." "Changed how?" "He says you smile more now, and that you're not afraid of questions you can't answer." From the mouths of babes again. Zoe was right. I had changed. The rigid certainty that had defined my early career had been replaced by something more flexible, more open to possibility. I still believed in science, still relied on evidence, still practiced medicine with the same clinical rigor. But I'd learned to hold space for mystery alongside methodology. "Your father is a wise man," I told her. "He's also completely healthy," I announced to the family, pulling up his lab results on the screen. Every marker normal. No evidence of disease. Genetically, it's as if the leukemia never existed. Angela opened the leather journal she still carried, now filled with new prayers, new gratitudes, new specific requests for people in their community facing impossible diagnoses. "Doctor," she said, "Pastor Williams wanted me to ask you something. We're starting a support group at our church for families dealing with cancer, medical facts combined with spiritual support. Would you consider being part of it?" The request represented territory I'd never imagined entering, a physician participating actively in faith-based healing community. But Marcus's recovery had taught me that healing happened in spaces larger than hospital rooms, through mechanisms more complex than pharmaceutical interventions. "I'd be honored," I said. As they prepared to leave, Marcus shook my hand with the same firm grip he'd had at discharge, the same warm circulation that had returned when medical science said it couldn't. "Doctor, do you remember what I told you that first day? About God not being finished yet?" I nodded. "I wasn't talking about my healing. I was talking about yours." That evening, I drove home through Chicago traffic, thinking about the journey from that first impossible diagnosis to this moment of impossible gratitude. I'd entered medicine to fight disease with science. I'd discovered that sometimes the fight required weapons science couldn't provide: hope, faith, community, and the willingness to believe in possibilities that existed beyond current understanding. Marcus Johnson's blood had told a story that challenged everything I thought I knew about medicine. But more than that, his recovery had rewritten my story as a physician, opening my eyes to healing that happened not despite mystery, but because of it. In 12 years of practicing hematology, I'd learned that numbers don't lie. But I'd also learned that truth is larger than numbers. Healing is broader than medicine, and sometimes the impossible happens in the presence of those willing to witness it. Have you ever encountered something that challenged everything you thought you knew about what's possible? Sometimes the most profound healing happens not in our bodies, but in our understanding of what reality can contain. I told God that if He let my baby live, I would never doubt His power again. She reached into her purse and pulled out a faded photograph. An impossibly small infant in what looked like a primitive incubator. Marcus came home 3 weeks later. The doctors called it remarkable. Unprecedented recovery. Medical anomaly. She looked up at me. I called it God. The story hit me unexpectedly. I'd heard similar accounts before. Premature infants defying odds, recoveries that couldn't be easily explained. We attributed them to improved medical technology, better understanding of neonatal care, statistical outliers in a complex system. Mrs. Johnson, medical science has come a long way since— Doctor, she interrupted gently. I'm not here to debate medicine with you. I'm here to tell you that my son has been marked for miracles his entire life, and I'm asking you to be ready for what's coming. She stood to leave, then turned back. One more thing. Tomorrow is day 7. The last day of his first round of chemotherapy. That's right. Tomorrow night, our entire church is gathering to pray. Not just for healing, but for you. For your eyes to be open to see what God is about to do. After she left, I sat in my office staring at Marcus's file. Day 7 of induction chemotherapy for high-risk AML. In my experience, this was when we'd know if the treatment was working, when the numbers would tell us whether we were buying time or simply postponing the inevitable. I pulled up his latest labs. White count, 28,000. Better, but still 15 times normal. Blast percentage, still over 60%. The genetic markers remained unchanged. FLT3 ITD positive, complex karyotype. All the indicators that whispered terminal in the language of cellular biology. But there was something else in that room now. Something I couldn't quantify or measure. The way Marcus smiled despite the nausea. How Angela wrote in her journal with absolute confidence. The parade of visitors who carried hope like it was something solid, something they could pass from hand to hand. That evening, I drove home through Chicago traffic thinking about prayers and percentages, about the space between medical science and human faith. Elena found me standing in our kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "How's your patient?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "The numbers say one thing. But there's something else happening, something I can't explain." She kissed my cheek. Maybe that's the point. The next morning would be day 7. The day when Marcus's blood would tell us whether science or something beyond science was winning this fight. As I went to sleep that night, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I prayed.